Now, in February 1980, the television comedy Yes Minister, written by Tony Jay and Jonathan Lynn, was first broadcast. And now, a quarter of a century later, the former Conservative Party leader William Hague concludes his review of the series to find out just how true to life it was.
It's 25 years since the comedy programme Yes Minister first appeared on our television screens. It entertained millions of viewers with its insight into the struggles between politicians and civil servants. But did it reflect political reality? The impact of the programme firstly depended on the credibility of its storylines.
Oh, it's from the minister's daughter.
You astound me, Ben.
Oh?
Trouble at Mill?
Miss Hacker intends to join the Badger protest.
Oh, I thought it was over.
No, she and her boyfriend are going to conduct a 24-hour Save the Badgers vigil in Hayward Spinney.
The former Home Secretary David Blunkett can empathise with the situation in which Jim Hacker finds himself.
We're all subject to that, because I have sons, older sons, who gave me a terrible time when they were going through university and I was changing the funding scheme, or where they were not in favour in one case of ID cards, in another instance in terms of investigatory powers. I mean, we have family lives and we have to balance, as I know to my cost, the personal and the political.
The fact that politicians could relate to Yes Minister is something that pleases its co-writer, Sir Anthony Jay.
When we started the series, we weren't sure whether it would catch on at all. In fact, that was quite a good thing, because we weren't sure if other people would find it as funny as we did. So we thought, well, let's make sure that even if they don't laugh all that much, at least they enjoy the half hour. So we set out to write good stories that people would like to follow and see the answer of. It wasn't just situations where people swap funny lines. It was a genuine developing story. We had no idea that we'd still be talking about it 25 years later. We were just hoping that they'd ask us to do a second series.
So how true to life were the events portrayed? Did any of the storylines actually happen in real life? Bernard Donahue was the head of the Downing Street Policy Unit in the late 1970s. He knew a lot about the inner workings of government, which he did share with the writers.
The civil service pay was based on what happened in my time there with Harold Wilson, when we had a terrible inflation crisis in this country. The economy was just collapsing, and we were introducing a pay policy that limited everyone to a £6 increase. But the civil servants wanted to get their pay rise in before the policy took place.
Well, with the financial crisis, it's obvious we shall have to bring in some form of pay restraint. See, the problem is the MPs are being denied the pay rise they've been expecting just at the moment that we're due to bring forward the proposed civil service pay rise.
So there were urgent meetings on the basis of the civil service pay, and so we saw the civil service manoeuvring with their incredible bureaucratic skills and their office politics.
The storyline rings only too true for civil servants, as the former Cabinet Secretary Robin Butler explains.
I remember one time when the government was being difficult about civil service pay, as they so often were, and I was talking to the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, Sir Terry Burns it was at the time, and I remember saying to Terry, well, you know, it's not the likes of you and me that I worry about. We're all right. It's the civil servants down the line who are going to have trouble with their mortgages and their cars and sending their children to school. And then I thought to myself, that sounds somehow familiar.
But one does owe it to one's junior colleagues to do everything one can. Ironic, isn't it, Frank? Trying to help them involves raising our own salaries, which we don't care about at all.
And I remembered Sir Humphrey saying exactly the same thing to Sir Frank with a look of sickening hypocrisy on his face, and it really did bring me down to earth.
Civil servants did tend to behave more like Sir Humphrey when it involved their own pay and conditions, as I found when I was Pensions Minister. In 1993, I was busy raising the retirement age for women from 60 to 65. I suggested that at the same time we should bring civil service retirement ages across the board, in line with the rest of the workforce. I was presented with no end of reasons why this could not happen, and found my officials behaving in an uncharacteristically obstructive manner. One of the most memorable scenes from the programme is when the minister goes on an official visit to an Islamic nation. The prospect of a dry evening was too much for Hacker and Sir Humphrey, who were clearly used to alcohol oiling the wheels of diplomacy. They conspire to arrange for a communications room to be set up close to the reception, where bottles of whisky were hidden in the diplomatic bag. Urgent messages were then sent to the minister, calling him to top up his orange juice with scotch, a thought that Lord Butler appreciated.
That absolutely was the sort of episode that could happen. I remember it very well. If I remember, Bernard says to Jim Hacker, "There's a message for you."
Oh, excuse me, Minister. There's an urgent call for you in the communications room. Mr. Haig.
Hang on, I don't want to be implicated in this.
General Haig? No, Mr. Haig, you know, with the dimples.
Excuse me. Most important.
However, it wasn't just the minister who was implicated.
Oh, well, there is one for Sir Humphrey, Minister.
Oh, good, yes.
Yes, the Soviet embassy's on the line, Sir Humphrey, and Mr. Smirnov.
Foreign Office Minister Baroness Simons was a middle-ranking civil servant at the time.
Watching that scene, I didn't know the Foreign Office as well as I do today. At the time, I thought it was extremely funny, but I thought it was fanciful. I'm bound to say that having now been in the Foreign Office Ministry of Defence the best part of 8 years, I don't think that was quite as fanciful as all that. I think there was a good deal of an echo of the way in which things are handled.
Fanciful or fact?
It happened. I was there with James Callaghan in Pakistan.
Lord Donahue.
We had a very long evening there and a very long reception with just water or orange juice, and we plotted ahead of it how we could deal with this, and we said we had to have our desk very close to the huge reception room and the dinner room so that we could be in immediate contact with number 10 if there was a crisis, and we would go out to this desk with our glasses of orange juice and top it up from the desk drawers with very good whisky.
As the series developed, the writers started to get additional sources for storylines, as Tony J explains.
After the first episode went out, we got a phone call saying Lord Rothschild would like to talk to us, and Lord Rothschild was Senior Permanent Secretary. He'd been recruited in, and in particular what he gave us an insight into, which we knew nothing about, was how you tell off a Permanent Secretary. He knew all the dialogue. I was just writing down as fast as I possibly could everything he was saying, and we always transcribed it into the script of an episode where Sir Humphrey gets told off.
The Cabinet Secretary at the time, Robert Armstrong, recalls the scene all too well.
I can remember when Sir Humphrey Appleby was summoned by the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Arnold Robinson, to be given a dressing down, a wigging, which was done with silken smooth discretion.
Yes, well, I'm not in any sense reprimanding you. I don't know the facts well enough. But as head of the service, I would like your assurance that he won't be putting it into practice.
I certainly hope he won't be.
This could cause people to reflect on your soundness. Of course, I have no doubts about you myself, but anyway, I thought it might be useful to have a little chat.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Arnold.
The following day I had a meeting with my fellow permanent secretaries, and as they sat down they said, "Did you see Yes Minister last night, Roberts?" I said, "Yes." And then there was a pause, and I said, "I was wondering which of you to try that technique out on first." And the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Defence, Frank Cooper, who was a tough old bird, looked across the table and said, "Not on me, you don't."
Fortunately, Lord Armstrong didn't try to put it into practice, as his successor, Lord Butler, can testify.
I can't say that I was ever given a wigging by one of my predecessors. Indeed, they were always very good and kind to me. But I did recognise Sir Humphrey going to a Pall Mall club and taking advice from one or other of his predecessors. I frequently consulted Robert Armstrong and took advice from him and shared my agonies with him. There are many people that a Cabinet Secretary can share their agonies with, but his predecessor is one of them.
So there are scenes that ring true to political advisers and civil servants. But what about politicians? Here's my old Cabinet colleague, Ken Clarke.
Once, when I was, Minister of Health, by early days at Health, when we were trying to bring in managerial changes in the health service, made a visit to the WHO in Stockholm, and the ambassador showed me an episode I'd not seen. So with Swedish subtitles, I watched an episode where the minister was visiting a new hospital, brilliantly run, sparklingly clean, efficiently managed, and notices about halfway through the episode it has no patients. And, of course, is told by Sir Humphrey, well, patients come later, Minister, but they're very untidy, and, what we're here to concentrate on is the efficiency and management of the hospital.
Sir Michael Bishard was Permanent Secretary at the Education Department. He recalls his minister, David Blunkett, using the empty hospital episode to make a serious political point.
I well remember the sense that actually it's a lot easier to run a hospital with no patients. David Blunkett, who was the Secretary of State, used that as a piece of after-dinner entertainment at a strategy away day involving officials and ministers. And I think it was his gentle way of just suggesting that we should be more concerned about outcomes than we should about defending the department at all costs.
The hospital was running, and it was running perfectly, and everyone was very busy, and they were all doing their jobs. The only difference with a normal hospital was that there weren't any patients. And I feared that that's what might happen if we didn't connect the civil service with delivery on the ground, not with policy development, which they're very good at, not with preparation for legislation and carrying it through the House, which they're very good at, but actually the delivery of something out there in the community.
So Yes Minister provided an insight into the life of Whitehall and became a tool of politicians trying to change the civil service. However, did real life become Yes Minister after the fact? Did any of the storylines in the programme happen subsequently, in real life? Well, do you remember Phoenix the calf, who was saved during the foot-and-mouth epidemic in 2001? Funny how Jim Hacker ordered the RAF to rescue a stray old English sheepdog from Salisbury Plain in Yes Prime Minister. And in January 1986, Sir Humphrey described how the job of the civil service was to keep tension high between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, but apparently they didn't need much help.
The Chancellor will never forgive the Prime Minister for beating him to number 10, and the Prime Minister will never trust the Chancellor. After all, one never trusts anyone that one has deceived.
Surely such a thing couldn't happen in reality. And it's not just governments. Do you remember my policy of free schools in the 2001 general election? I couldn't explain the policy better than Jim Hacker's political advisor, Dorothy Wainwright, did in 1988.
Well, I suppose schools were like doctors. I mean, after all, under the National Health Service, you can choose whichever doctor you like to go to, can't you?
Yes.
And he gets paid per patient. Well, why don't we do the same with schools? Have a National Education Service. The parents could choose the schools they want, and the schools get paid per pupil.
So what other home truths are there? Any ideas from Ken Clark?
There's an episode where Sir Humphrey is banned from number 10 because he's interfering too much. And worst of all, has his pass taken away that gets him through the door and becomes absolutely desperate about what on earth the Prime Minister's up to without access to his vital advice. I remember Sir Humphrey gazing through the window at one point in agitation trying to get in. And I realised that if any of us had lost the little card enabled us to get through from the Cabinet Office or through from the outer workings of number 10 into the inner sanctum, suddenly we'd feel bereft of power, influence, what was going on, what was being plotted behind us. So I could understand Sir Humphrey's desperate feelings, and I also thought how marvellous it might be thinking of one or two named individuals, if only we could exclude them from the inner workings of the government in that way.
I hope you're not thinking about me there, Ken.